This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness, or so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. Welcome back to the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast. This time it's episode 86, and today's episode is a little bit different to the norm. Earlier in the podcast, I shared my observations from time to time about certain episodes, and it's something that I haven't done recently. So today, we're in reflective mode, where I'm going to pick out some themes and unpick them further. Firstly, though, before I get started, recently, I've hit a landmark number on the podcast of 20,000 downloads. And in my Facebook group, the Sports Psychology Hub, we've also recently now got to 1,000 group members, where we go on to share our valuable discussions and help each other. I'm truly grateful for this, for your ongoing support for the podcast and to the group members. So a big thank you. The group itself, it has athletes, coaches, parents of athletes, sports psychologists in training, and mental skills coaches, as well as a range of specialists interested in the field, all involved. All in all, it's a great group to be involved in. So if you aren't a member, feel free to sign up. Details of the Sports Psychology Hub are in the show notes. So as I mentioned, today is a little bit different. It's very much a reflective episode. My reason for doing this is, as a healthcare professional, there's a need to never stop learning, to ensure that you keep your skills and your knowledge up to date, to see learning as a career-long thing. Why? It's so you can be outstanding at your job, to be a highly effective practitioner. And for this podcast, I want to make this podcast an outstanding podcast too. So it's my belief from time to time that we need to take a step back. We need to consider some of the lessons that we learn. So in this case, I'm going to walk the walk, and hopefully I'm going to upskill your knowledge around mental toughness and share with you some timely reminders. And coincidentally, this is all linked to an element of mental toughness, learning orientation. So let's have a little refresher on this element. Learning orientation. Well, a person who scores high in learning orientation is someone who responds positively to challenges and setbacks, knowing that these provide an opportunity for personal development. They recognize that setbacks are a normal part of life, and they welcome the fact that they may need to change things up, change their routines. They look forward to new experiences. Naturally, they may worry, but a lot less than some when the unexpected happens. All in all, they'll see opportunities in these challenges, and most definitely, they'll review setbacks and failures as part of the learning process. They'll also want to respond by trying again. They're not likely to walk away. Major setbacks might throw them, and they might need time for reflection and recovery, but they will more than likely engage in the relevant changes that are desired to make things happen, to take action. So now I'm going to dig a bit deeper and go into these statements in more detail, as well as sharing some different examples. Statement 1. Someone who responds positively to challenges and setbacks, knowing that these provide an opportunity for personal development. How often do you see an athlete, especially youngsters, get upset when a setback occurs? Perhaps they make a mistake when they're on the pitch or the course. Then they can't perform to the standard they'd like to because they get caught up dwelling on the mistake. They certainly aren't thinking about it providing opportunities for their personal development. And often it's their view of winning and losing, or success and failure, which is skewed. So let's consider a famous Michael Jordan quote. I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot, and I've failed over and over and over again in my life. That's right, the best in the business aren't perfect. They do make mistakes frequently too. So I'm going to offer a little bit of advice now. I'd like you to sit down with a pen and paper and create a chart. Think about reflecting. And what I'd like you to do is break down your game. Break it down into 4 elements. You've got your A game, your B game, your C game, and your D game. Your A game is when you're at your absolute best, when you're flying. Your B game is when you're good. Your C game is when you're average. And your D game is when you're rubbish. Now, let's think about how often each game comes out. Maybe what you can do is go back to the last 3 months and consider in percentage terms how often the A game, the B game, the C game, and the D game actually come out. So you should come up with something like 10% A game, 50% B game, 30% C game, 10% D game. They should all total to 100%. And then what I'd like you to do is make some notes, or certainly think about what it is that you're thinking, what it is that you're feeling, your actual behaviors that show up in the A game, the B game, the C game, the D game. And then you may want to adjust the percentages if that's the case. This really can be a powerful exercise, and it can help you maintain a better perspective going forward. It can make you appreciate and realize how often or how little you actually are at your best. And it can help you cut yourself some slack going forward. Point 2 now. So statement 2. Someone who is high in learning orientation recognizes that obstacles or setbacks are a normal part of life, and that they welcome the fact that they may need to change things up. That's right, change their routines. They're going to look forward to new experiences. So I'd pose the question, are you guilty of doing the same thing and expecting different results? Are you too comfortable? Perhaps you're frightened about something, so you worry about shaking things up. So a way to resolve this, I'd like you to spend about 5 to 10 minutes where you write 3 short letters. So the first letter, you're going to start it with Dear Comfortable, and then you're going to write your thoughts and your feelings down about this word, and you're going to see where it takes you. Obviously, you're going to be considering the situation that you're in when you do so. Second letter is Dear Fear. So you're going to start the letter with Dear Fear. And again, you're going to write down your thoughts and your feelings around fear. And what's stopping you making some desired changes that could really push you forward and propel you forward. Lastly, we're going to go with Dear Opportunity. So that's right, write down Dear Opportunity on your sheet of paper, on your letter. And now consider your thoughts about confronting your fears and seeing these challenges as opportunities, and what that's going to feel like, what it's going to look like at the end of the day. As I mentioned, this exercise could take 10 to 15 minutes, even a little bit longer, but it can be very motivational. It can really shift your thinking. Now for point 3 on learning orientation. The statement that I said earlier was, naturally, they may worry, but a lot less than some when the unexpected happens. So this is the person who is high on learning orientation. So do you actually find that you're good at going with the flow when something unexpected happens? Or are you someone who catastrophizes? From a sporting context, I often see it where a stroke of bad luck happens. Perhaps the golfer may be having a good round when they hit a shot, which looks pretty good, but it takes an awful bounce. And before they know it, the good score has unraveled. It's turned into tatters. Some players are quick to get over this type of problem, but others, they get stuck and they just can't move on. Their body language becomes terrible. They dwell on the mistake, but actually they dwell on the bad bounce. Then they make some strange decisions after this event. The unfairness just becomes far too much for them because of their focus on the score, on winning. They go on to change technique, have 25 swing thoughts and so on, and it all unravels. So when we go back to the unexpected and bad breaks, it has actually been a topic of conversation on a number of different podcasts. Chris Paisley, earlier in the show, one of the early episodes, we talked about it. And also with Marilyn Okoro, the Olympian, she discussed it in episode 66, when she talked about the difficulties of being an athlete, relying on funding from a governing body, and the difficulties that come with that. And when it's your life, when it's your livelihood on the line, getting a balance between being highly goal-orientated, seriously driven, that's right, seriously driven, and caring too much can mean that you become a worrier. So it's a skill to be able to park events, to have I don't care type attitude. It certainly helps you not to catastrophize. So now we'll dig into point 4. They will also respond by wanting to try again, where many will want to walk away. Now, a good metaphor to think about in this respect is a baby learning to walk. How many times do they fall down before they can actually put 10 steps together? Lots and lots, hundreds of times, potentially even thousands of times in some cases. But do they worry? Do they worry about failing? Do they think about giving up? Most definitely not. They'll get up and try again and try again and try again. Yet as we get older, we become far too fearful. I've noticed a pattern in my work when I support youngsters. At around 9 to 11 years old, they tend to change their focus from being immersed in the task. So from being task-oriented to more of an ego orientation. And what I mean by that is that they move from being immersed in tasks to worrying more and more about what other people think of them. This can then distract them to the point where they want to give up. They focus so much on their teammates, on coaches, on parents, and trying to impress them, perhaps on scouts too. Now, in my conversation with world champion kickboxer Stuart Wade in episode 81, we discussed a lot about staying calm and composed and confident in combat sports. And there's certainly some great lessons in there. Let's face it, in combat sports, taekwondo, kickboxing, judo, any of those sports, if you're concentrating too much on your opponent, on what people are thinking, then you're not doing your job. And you're going to end up on your backside or your back on the canvas and potentially in a lot of pain. So in this episode, we talked a lot about mental preparation in those difficult moments. And we advocated the use of imagery to program the subconscious mind. So seeing and feeling how you're going to react when things go wrong, that can be so helpful. And point 5, this is my last point and a lengthy point. The person with a high level of learning orientation, when they encounter major setbacks, they might be thrown, they might need some time for reflection and recovery, but they're more likely to engage in the relevant changes to make things happen. And when you think about it, when you're invested a lot in a sport or a pastime or your work, the time, the energy, the money, the emotion, that feeling sorry for yourself is completely normal. When something bad or something difficult happens, it actually means that you care. And when we consider bouncing back and learning, different elements of mental toughness do come into play. They are part of the process. If you're goal-orientated, you're likely to want to move on and set new goals. But sometimes this type of person who scores high in this element doesn't actually sit back and reflect and think about the learning. They just go on and set goals straight away. This is quite often common with sporty people who are action orientated. Then you've got the person who may struggle controlling their emotions. For them, it might just take a little bit longer to recover and then go on and make some changes, especially if they don't have a very good support team around them. And then if we throw in the life control element too into the mix, this type of person naturally has a can-do attitude. And this is likely to go on and impact on their recovery. Their self-talk's likely to be positive. So all of these factors, the goal orientation, the life control, the emotional control, all can have an impact on learning orientation and our style. Right, so now I'm going to give you a big bit of learning to help you in this area of learning orientation. The bouncing back from mistakes, the setbacks, the challenges. If you use Gibbs's reflective cycle, which was developed by Gibbs in 1988 to give structure to learning from experiences. It's going to help you an awful lot. It offers a framework for examining experiences, and it allows you to learn and plan from things that didn't go well. Although I'm going to add there, it can actually work if things do go well and you want to learn from positive experiences too. So the cycle, it covers 6 stages. You've got description of the experience, feelings, and then thoughts about the experience. You've got evaluation of the experience, both good and bad. Analysis, to make sense of the situation. Conclusion, and this is about what you've learned and what you could have done differently. And then, importantly, you've got the action planning stage for how you would deal with similar situations in the future or general changes that you might want to put into place going forward. So firstly, we'll look at description. So this is when we're describing a situation in detail. So questions that you might ask yourself would be, what happened? When and where did it happen? Who was present? What did I do? What did other people do? What was the outcome of the situation? I'm going to go on to share an example now. So it's pretty common in my work in football that a player might play for a team that's struggling, or that they're involved in teams that lose matches. So I'm going to go with the example of a player who's in a team that's struggling. They lose more matches than that they win. So they're having to get used to conceding goals. So when their team concedes a goal, the player often looks around at his teammates and he sees heads are dropping. He sees his coach, parents on the sidelines. They're looking dispirited, or they might be yelling and screaming. Their body language isn't very good, and he can get distracted. His self-talk can go into overdrive, where he tells himself, what's the point? His body language then fits in with the rest of the group. The team as a whole then don't commit themselves fully to bouncing back. They don't press. They don't get stuck into tackles. And sure enough, 1-0 becomes 2 and 3 and 4. This is the type of information you're likely to make a note of when you reflect. And now the next part of the cycle is feelings. So here we can explore feelings and thoughts that you've had during the experience and how it went on to impact yourself. So what were you feeling during the situation? What were you feeling before and after the situation? What do you think other people were feeling about the situation? What do you think other people feel about the situation now? Those are the types of questions you could ask yourself. And in this case, the player's feeling deflated at 1-0. He's got a mixture of emotions. He's sad. He's determined. He wants to get back into the game. But also he wants to give up after he looks at his teammates and their reactions to it. His teammates are feeling the same. They're looking around, looking at the body language of their teammates. They're hearing the shouts from the sidelines. They're getting overwhelmed by the instructions that the coach is offering. These voices are making them feel sad and, as I say, overwhelmed. They hear criticism from the sidelines, and this hurts a player and the team and his teammates. As the game goes on, anger occurs at himself, where he becomes very self-critical, but also anger at teammates. He takes it out on teammates. The next step is evaluation. And here you have a chance to evaluate what actually worked, what didn't work in the situation. Being honest as possible is really, really important in this part of the process. Well, in all parts of the process for that matter. But it is important in this aspect to think about the positives and the negatives of the situation. Try not to go down just one route. So helpful questions in this regard, this part of the process, are what was good and bad about the experience? What went well? What didn't go so well? What did you and other people contribute to the situation? And again, positively or negatively. So in this example, the player finds it difficult to see any good in the situation because he's so downhearted by it. His effort levels drop, his focus and concentration go, although he did notice that he didn't completely give up. Looking at the positives, he recognizes When the ball did land at his feet, he did try and take on the fullback. He had some shots on goal, so he didn't, as I say, completely give up. He recognised, though, that his communication was poor. Again, not all of the time. He did encourage sometimes, but if he thinks about a leader, a captain who would shout and encourage teammates an awful lot, he was pretty quiet. He understands that he demanded the ball a little bit, but he certainly could do a lot better. So let's move on now to the next stage. This is analysis. And this step is where you have the chance to make sense of what happened. Up until now, you've thought about the details about the situation. Now you're looking at the meaning, trying to extract the meaning from it. And as you do so, you want to target different aspects that went well or poorly again. So again, the types of questions you're likely to ask yourself when you do reflect in this way are, why did things go well? Or why didn't things go well? What sense can I make of this situation? What knowledge, my own or others, can help me understand the situation? So going back to this example, things didn't go well for this player because he let the scoreline and his teammates' reactions get to him. It affected his body language. It affected his self-talk, his focus, his effort levels, his communication. He recognises that he can't control the scoreline, that he is one of 22 players on the pitch. So he only actually plays a small part in the scoreline. He recognises that he can't control his teammates or his coach's reactions, though that he can do something about his attitude, about the way that he communicates and how he does bounce back from difficulties. And then we've got the fifth section. This is conclusions. So in this section, you can make conclusions about what happened. And this is where you're going to go on and summarize your learning and highlight what changes to your actions could improve the outcome in the future. So again, helpful questions. We've got, what did I learn from this situation? How could this have been more positive for me and for everybody involved? What skills do I need to develop for me to handle the situation better? What else could I have done? So he made a note, this player. I learned that I have a choice how I can react and respond when the team is going behind. I recognize that I can choose to follow others. I can be more selfish. I can choose to be a role model for the rest of the team and hope that my behaviors lift them. If I want to impress my coaches or scouts, if I want to stand out to be the best player on the pitch, I can do things differently. Also, if I want to get a reputation from opponents as someone who they hate to play against, I need to change my attitude and my focus on the pitch. So then lastly, we've got the action planning stage. So this step is when you plan for a different outcome. You're going to look at the situation. You're going to think about the future if that situation crops up again. And it's really, really helpful for you to think about how you're going to act differently, how you're going to behave, and what plan you need to put in place. So helpful questions in this regard are, if I had to do the same thing again, what would I do differently? How am I going to develop these required skills? How can I make sure that I do act differently next time? So the footballer says he would have opened his mouth, that he would encourage his teammates straight away. He wouldn't let the scoreline affect him, that he'd continue with the attitude that if we get beat, I'm going to make sure that I give the fullback a torrid time. I'm going to make sure the fullback remembers me and thinks that he never wants to play against me again. I'm going to think that I'm a good player, and I want to make his job as difficult as possible by asking for the ball, demanding the ball all of the time from my teammates. I'm also going to recognize that I might not get the ball, but it's not going to stop me from demanding it. I'm always going to keep on my toes. I'm going to move. I'm going to find space. I'm going to be a complete pest to this player when we're attacking. And if we don't get the ball, I'm going to press when necessary. Also, I'm going to recognize that when it comes down to coaches and scouts who view games, that they're going to see these types of behaviors as really, really positive. It's going to help me stand out on the pitch. It's going to also mean that I'm going to have more fun because I'm going to get the ball more. And hopefully, by behaving in this way, my teammates are going to get a lift. It's going to encourage them to play better too. And you never know, that 1-0 might turn into 1-1. We might start winning more games than we'll lose. My attitude can rub off on the rest of them. So now I hope you've noted that is the end of the six-step process. It's certainly a hugely helpful one, and I hope talking through it, giving an example like I have done, has helped you. By going through this process, it can really help you take control of your learning. It can shift your focus. And you'll find in the show notes that I've added details of the process. Gibbs's reflective cycle is in the show notes, as well as a link to another podcast episode where I've mentioned it too, and a blog. And as I've said many times previously, self-awareness is critical. If you're going to learn, if you're going to get better in this type of exercise, as well as the podcast in general, is what we're trying to build. We're trying to build self-awareness. I'm hoping that it's challenging you, that you're going to question your approach and go on and make some adjustments. One thing to note, however, is that whether you are mentally tough or lower on the continuum towards mentally sensitive, it is possible to become a cropper if you don't recognize these feelings or your feelings and stay with them. The person who has a positive outlook but fails to take a step back and follow processes like this can actually lead them to making too many risks, too many changes, which then increase their chances of failure. That's right, further failures and further setbacks. So again, as I say, self-awareness is important, and recognizing if you are that type of person, if your positive demeanor and positive outlook does affect that learning process, if you like. So now, as we look at closing this episode of Demystifying Mental Toughness, I'm going to go back to basics, the basics around reflecting. And when we consider how we learn, generally it's by investing in ourselves through continual professional development, or CPD. It's attending conferences, it's reading, it might be training courses, things like that. But also, it is important to note that you can learn through reflection. It is actually a form of CPD in my type of work. An effective reflection, it requires you and your colleagues to be open and honest with each other and with yourself without a fear of being blamed. And this is particularly important if something's gone wrong. Taking time to reflect, it can help you to identify what went wrong and why. And as I've mentioned earlier, what steps that can be taken to prevent the issues happening again. It can also help you see what you've been doing well and what you can improve on to get better, to get those extra 1% out there. So reflection, it requires honesty and self-critical assessment. It shouldn't just be paid lip service and seen as a tick box exercise, which it often is. So if you're a coach or a teacher or a manager and you do see it as a quick tick box exercise, I'd encourage you to question your approach. There's a reason for doing it. And also, I think it's important for you to consider what it is that you actually want to get out of reflecting. How do you want to walk away from the reflective exercise? Do you want to feel energized, motivated, and more confident that you're heading in the right direction? It's very easy to make reflection very negative. A lot of people do. They do approach it in the wrong way. So I'd encourage you to take on board some of the messages that we talk about in this podcast when you do reflect. For example, in the recent podcast with Dr. Jim Aframo and Phil White, we talked about the importance of controlling the controllables, as I did in last week's episode when I helped parents and coaches consider their approach when supporting youngsters. Reflection should focus you so that you seek to work out what is under your control, and that's a skill. It isn't about replaying past mistakes over and over again in your head and being really, really hard on yourself. It's a process that should leave you feeling uplifted, positive, and hopeful. Many people, they walk off pitches, courses, racetracks, at the end of events, very emotional, very negative about their experience, their skills, their ability. They put themselves down. They label themselves as rubbish. And labeling is something that I discuss in episode 73 when I talk about making quick judgments and how it can be detrimental to people. And in this respect, empathy is vital and self-compassion. So one last key message for you is, when you reflect, I'd like you to consider how empathetic you are to yourself, how compassionate you are to yourself. Can you cut yourself some slack? It's going to help you reframe the situation into a more positive experience. You'll also likely have a lot better chance of learning from the situation. Next week, we're going to be back to normal with a great guest sharing insights. In the meantime, enjoy your learning, enjoy your reflection, and have a great week. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sport psychology resources. The Sport-Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.